This was in the U.S. I was listening to a U.S. station
Right.
on the radio.
Because unfortunately, I just saw that in Israel the rates are going up again. So I don't know that. Hopefully,
in other words, yeah. I mean, it's run. It seems to have run its course. So that's
from your lips, Rabbi. Hopefully, I'm don't know yet.
Yeah. There will be a vaxxed and masked minion. Oh, you are being sarcastic? Oh, okay. That's fine. Who knows? I can never tell anymore. I can't tell. Okay. So welcome back, everybody. We were learning about the halacha of Bal Tashchis, about the prohibition of destroying items gratuitously. And we learned about throwing away food or treating food with disrespect. I think the last thing that we saw, we learned about the halacha of osa adam kol tzrachav b'pas, that you're allowed to do whatever you want with bread, as long as you don't cause it to be spoiled in the process. Another thing, we were in the middle of seeing the likutim. Ein lahachil behema the davar haroi la'adam. You're not supposed to feed animals food that's fit for humans, which is also a form of bal tashchis. Now, that might not apply as much anymore, where people, treat their animals as members of the family. But because, it happens all the time. You have scraps and you feed the scraps to your pet. So the scraps are not fit anymore for human consumption. So, but let's say, you're making dinner, it's one steak per person. You shouldn't make a steak for your dog. Okay. Now, be'inyan bal tashchis gam safek bal tashchis aser, as far as, even if it's a safek bal tashchis, it's also problematic. And ma'achalos, and we had said, what was the word that we were talking about? Let's see. O ma'abed ma'achalos or sha'ar mashkin, if you destroy any kind of food item. And the Likutim here says, Va'afta ein chiluk bein lechem l'sha'ar ma'achalim. He says, yes, it's true. There's no difference between bread and other foods. Mikol makom balechem yeshna zihirus yisera. But there's a greater amount of caution that is placed in halacha upon destroying bread. Umuva b'shem hazohar hakadosh, the tlasa inun garmin bisha legoromayu. The Zohar says that 3 different kinds of people cause damage to themselves through their behavior. Man dezarik nahama o perurin, if a person throws bread or throws crumbs around. Let's see. The isbahu kazayas, if the crumbs have a kazayas in them, is one of those 3 people who cause themselves damage. So that's the idea behind behind Bal Tashchis. Let's just at least take a look at the Biurim today and see what his topic is, because it actually is a very, very long piece. We're not going to do the whole piece. We'll just start it today to learn a little bit more about the parameters of Bal Tashchis. Because bread is that's, first of all, that's a good, that in itself reinforces the idea, right? But bread is considered, at least in the ancient world, the basic staple of a meal. It's the fact that in the 20th century that changed, but you have to remember that has been true for, I think I'm going to take off my mask. Is that okay? Does anyone have a problem? That it has been true for most of human history that bread has been the basic staple of a person's diet. It is interesting that so many people have an intolerance for gluten, something that It was not known for centuries, but anyway. Okay, ma'abed ma'achalos, if a person destroys food, v'zeh amur dafka imhu ma'abdo b'derech hashchasa. The only prohibition is when you destroy food in a destructive way. If you cause food to be lost in a destructive way. Avol masha motzai, shemevashlim ha'ofim ma'achal chadash, v'al yedei zeh nigram shema'achalim yeshanim einam ne'achalim v'nizrakim la'ashpa. This is the question that many of us had asked about all of the baltashkas that takes place on an industrial level. He says, but even in your own home, what if you cook a new meal and all your leftovers then have to be discarded because you want something fresh? Like, at what point is baltashkas not baltashkas, but just simply it's not fresh anymore? I'd rather have something fresh cooked. Bazeh eino over al baltashkas. That's not a prohibition of baltashkas, right? Even if the old food is still perfectly edible, just that it's not as good as the fresh. This is indicated by the Gemara in Maseches Shabbos. The Amar Rav Chisda, Ayman de efshole lamechol nahami desari va'achal dechiti ka'avar mishom baltashkas. He says as follows. He makes a very bizarre statement. He says, if a person is able to eat barley bread and instead he eats wheat bread, he is violating baltashkas. So what does that even mean? Well, I mean, first of all, barley bread is a lower quality than wheat bread. That was considered, barley is a grain that is a cheaper commodity. It's often used for animal feed, but you can also make bread out of it. So if you eat barley bread, if you could eat barley bread, but instead you eat wheat bread, you violate baltashkas. And va'amar Rav Papa Haiman de efshel lemishtei shichra v'shasi chamrach ka'avar mishum baltashkas. And Rav Papa says an equally bizarre statement. If you could drink cheaper beer, but instead you drink more expensive wine, you violate baltashkas. But then the Gemara says v'lav milsa. But neither statement is correct. Baltashchis degufa adif adkan, because it is worse to destroy your body. In other words, there is a greater there is greater baltashchis problems when you eat something that's not as healthy for your body than when you could have eaten something less expensive. In other words, the Gemara seems to be indicating that one of the reasons of baltashchis is that you shouldn't wantonly just throw away your money, okay? In other words, don't throw away your money. Could you get by with barley bread instead of wheat bread? So why pay $3 a loaf when you can only pay $2 a loaf? The fact that you're paying an extra $1 for a loaf of wheat bread instead of barley bread means that you're being over on baltashkas. And then the Gemara rejects that, and it says, no. What will make a healthier person? Wheat bread or barley bread? You'll be healthier if you eat wheat bread. You'll feel good, your gut will be healthier or whatever, and you'll feel better about yourself. So there's more of a baltashkas to your body by eating barley bread than eating wheat bread. So what the Gemara is basically exposing us to is a sort of a tension between two considerations. One is not being so, I can't find the word that I'm thinking about, but just throwing away your money on frivolous things.
It's wasteful.
That's a form of baltashchis, right? And then there's an opposing form of baltashchis is don't deny yourself, your body, or your person, so to speak, with things that you are capable of providing yourself with, because if you fail to do that, you're also over on baltashchis. Okay, v'hinei hot desvir leila Rav Papa Rav Chisda diyesh mishum baltashchis nira demairi ba'ofen shayedei sheyochal nami dechiti hu gorim danami desar yelech liibud b'yushchas. He says, first of all, one way of explaining that Gemara, which I don't know that it's necessarily the only way, but he says one way of understanding the Gemara is that by eating the wheat bread, you're causing the barley bread to go to waste. He says, because if that were not the case, then what possible baltashchis is there? Now, he says, "Va'afta efshul lefarish degam hecha de'ena holech leibud mikol makom etzem hadavar shalem kona ochel lechem chitim efshul shel sorin yesh bo mishum batashches." He says in the parentheses, one way of explaining it is the way I had originally explained it, is that the very fact that you could get by with a $2 loaf instead you buy a $3 loaf is in itself baltashlis. You're throwing away your money. He says, "Avalanias daiti yoser nira kamosha kasavna." But he says, but I prefer my interpretation that it's you're eating the wheat bread at the expense of the barley bread that's right there, and you bake a new loaf of wheat bread when you could have just eaten the barley bread. Mishum delo mistaber lomer der Rav Chisda v'Rav Papa yisperu d'asur la'adam lechol shemaychol shu yoser choshen mimashon nisrach l'veish mishum batashchitz. Because it doesn't make sense to say that these two great Amoraim would be of the opinion that anytime you eat something more expensive when you get by with something less expensive, that you're over on baltashchis. Valkein yira yoser the gam lefi daitam ein bo iser rakecha shalechem sarmo hashecha olecha yidei leibud. He says, and that's why I think that it's talking about where by drinking the wine or eating the wheat bread, the other bread is going to waste. Now, I'm going to take issue with Rav Stern here, because I happen to be somewhat familiar with that daf kuf mem in Masechah Shabbos, and it's really more of agadata than it is halacha. And when you're dealing with agadic passages, you have to appreciate that the term baltashchis is not being used in a halachic way. They're trying to teach a value, and the value is don't pamper yourself with things that you don't need. If you can get by with lesser things, the simpler things in life, don't pamper yourself. Now, of course, that's not an absolute, right? I may be able to afford to go to an expensive restaurant every day, but that's what they're basically saying, is that even if you can afford it, don't pamper yourself with the finest things in life when you can get by with the next class. And it's just a question. It's an exercise, not so much of the prohibition of baltashchitz. It's an exercise in humility. It's an exercise of, I don't know, what would you call it? A person living a frugal life. Like, you read about these multi gazillionaires who still drive an 87 Chevrolet, Right. Well, I'm saying, but that's the point. There's a certain value. There's a certain value. There's a certain denomination of Christianity called Calvinism, which emphasizes this value to a very great extent, perhaps more than we do in Judaism. But it's perhaps that value is basically live a humble lifestyle. And by the way, Benjamin Franklin, people who founded the United States, were, exercise that Calvinist ethic, and they felt that was the key to economic prosperity, which is generate income, save your money, put it away, and live frugally during the course of your lifetime. And that is what creates economic prosperity, because there's a tremendous amount of money, of funds available, especially for a rainy day, and no one has to starve. That was the attitude. But I will say this: that's certainly not the value for a lot of Jews today.
Rabbi, don't.
Izzy, I don't think he can hear us.
Really?
Because I've said a few things and he hasn't responded.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know whether there's a way to message him.
But
But
let me ask you. I mean, wouldn't you think about your parents, right? Their generation. This is a value that they would say, yeah, of course.
Maybe I'll put my hand up and see what happens.
They would say, like, well, of course. What do you need that kind of car for? What do you need an Armani suit for? A Pashida suit is just as good. Yes, Izzy.
Don't we also have the principle of?
I can't hear you.
Yeah.
We can't hear you, Izzy. I'm sorry.
It's you.
Is anyone?
Yeah,
can anyone
no, you
hear?
can't.
You.
Okay,
you can't
hold
hear
on
us.
a second. I have a feeling that I must be on the wrong. No, Paul said we can't hear. Let's take a look and see. Okay. Okay, let me try this. Someone want to try and speak now?
Oh, yes,
Yeah, can you
hello?
hear us now, Rabbi?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I didn't really think you were ignoring my other comments, but I presume you couldn't hear me all the way through. So no worries, but I think Izzy has something now.
Rabbi, don't we also have the principle that don't live a miserly life? Because when it comes to give tzedakah, you're going to say, why should I give you? I live this kind of life. Why should you have more?
I've never heard it expressed in that way. A person should live, there's a difference between miserliness and frugality.
Mhm.
A frugal person is a person who says, if I can get by with less, I'll try to get by with less. A miserly person is of the attitude, I need all my money and I can't afford to spare anything to give for charity. Those are two different values. Obviously, I see the intersection that you're alluding to, but I'll tell you, to me, what's a big turnoff. A guy is a shliach mitzvah, comes to collect tzedakah, and then he's smoking outside the shul during the time when there's no one there. I say that my attitude is, if you can afford cigarettes, why are you schnorring, right? Cigarettes is a luxury. It's a luxury lifestyle, right? If a guy really needs tzedakah, he should be living frugally as well. I'm not interested in providing tzedakah for a person who has a very lavish lifestyle, right? But I do agree that people should live less than their means instead of at their means or higher than their means. Paul, what did I enter? I'm sorry, I missed you.
No worries. I can't remember right now, but that's fine. I'm glad we're back connected.
Yeah. Hi, Ron.
Aren't we supposed to encourage to put aside that attitude and for Shabbos, not only Shabbos, but we try to encourage to have the best foods, the best clothes, the best everything
Yes.
for Shabbos and to splurge.
Yes, we are supposed to splurge for Shabbos, but again, within reason. There are competing values in everything in life, right? In everything that we do in life, there are competing values. Raising our children, there are competing values. Discipline versus love, right? Competing values. We find the golden mean in between. The same thing when it comes to honoring Shabbos. And the question I have to make sure I ask myself is, why am I honoring Shabbos with this particular food? Right? Do I really have in mind that when I take a bite out of that filet mignon, which, by the way, I just had filet mignon in Israel because my host served it to me. Right. I left a little bit on my plate. Zeichel l'chorban, yeah. Right. All right. I just came back from Dubai. Those people do not live frugally. That's one thing I can tell you. Although we went to a sheikh's home, and he was not ostentatious, right? Many of the mosques are very, very, the grand mosque that we went to in Abu Dhabi was the most opulent building I've ever seen in my life. Hands down, I've never seen a more grand. It was like going to the Taj Mahal. I've never been to the Taj Mahal, but I can only imagine what it's like, right? But when it comes, many of them, it's also an Arab value when it comes to living your personal life. Don't flaunt it. So there's a difference between splurging on food that's expensive for Shabbos, let's say, versus living like that during your entire life. So anyway, I think that this was the value that was being described. But Rav Stern wants to make this a halachic issue. And he wants to infer from this story in the Gemara that the reason why they talk about it in terms of bal tashchis is because when you eat the wheat bread, the barley bread will go to waste. The im kol zos maskinen begemara dein bo isra mishum the bal tashchis the gufa adav. He says, why? Why are you allowed to eat the wheat bread? Because even though you could have gotten by with the barley bread, there's still an aspect of bal tashchis to your body, which means you can buy junk at the dollar store and get by with that nutrition, but it'll be destructive to your body. In other words, I'm sure you could probably get by with $5 a day on food. If you bought all your food at the dollar store, you could probably have plenty of food and fulfill all of your caloric requirements if you went to the dollar store and spent $5 a day on food. But that would also be a problem of baltashchis on the other side, because your body would not respond well. So there's an aspect of destroying your body, right? He says, "V'hinei milashon hagemara da amru baltashchis tegufa adif yesh lichor ledayek dedafka hecha shemenias hamaychal hasheni yesh bo chisaron leguf." But we can also make a diuk, an inference, that when you deprive yourself of food, there's only a problem because it's going to cause harm to your body. Az shari ligram liibud ma'achal acher. Then you can throw away the old food. Kaven the bal tashchis the gufa adif. Lachein shari lemishti yain belechol paschitim. And that's why you're allowed to drink wine instead of beer, and wheat bread instead of barley bread. Hol shehem yoter mo'ilim leguf me'asher lechem so'orim v'shechar. Because they're more healthy for your body than beer and barley bread. He says, but let's say the first food is equally as healthy. In other words, you have a salad, lettuce, all the food is in your refrigerator. It's starting to wilt a little bit, but it's just as healthy as a fresh salad. But the fresh salad is better tasting. So what would be the halacha in that situation? So you want to eat a fresher food, a tastier food, but it may be a little bit less healthy than perhaps a food which is maybe a little older, it's not as tasty. And then by doing that, you're going to throw away the healthier, older, not as tasty food to eat the more expensive steak, let's say. The bazelo shayach lomar baltashchis tegufa adif mashma l'chora deyeshbo iser baltashchis. He says, then it sounds like there might be a problem of baltashchis by throwing away the older food, because just because you want to pamper yourself with a more expensive kind of food, what right do you have to throw away perfectly good food? He says, Achein ba'emes nira deze'eno. He says, but that too, we would not say. The hare ein ze elagrama ba'alma. He says, because all you're doing is a causative act. You're not wantonly destroying food. You're simply discarding it and passing it over for more desirable food. And he goes on and on and on. So this is really the theme of what he's getting to, is defining the parameters of baltashchis. Does baltashchis mean that anytime I throw away food that's perfectly edible, I'm over on baltashchis? No, right? Because if that were the case, it would never be permitted for me to throw away any leftovers unless it was mamish no longer edible. And we discard our leftovers all the time, right? And so let me get to the punchline, because this is a very, very lengthy piece. He says, he talks about hefsed ochlim. He talks about the disgracing and discarding of food. He says he ends up by saying, he says, Venira, the masheregilim hachaklaim upardasanim la'abed perot v'yirakot kedei lishmar al mechiram. He says another thing that we see happening is that farmers will at times discard produce in order to maintain the prices in the market. In other words, there may be a surplus in farm production, and they'll throw away whole acres of grain in order to maintain the market prices. He says, "The yeshlahem otfim merubim shagarim lahoradas hamachirim b'shuk lehavzed." That's because if they provide all of their surplus materials, the market value of certain commodities will go way down and it'll destroy the market. That is not a problem of baltashchis. But in that situation, it would be better to allow the food to just compost naturally instead of actively destroying it. And in any situation where you can feed the poor instead of just wantonly destroying perfectly good food, then you should. In other words, yes, the supermarkets and manufacturers, everywhere along the food chain, they are destroying food. There's no question about it. But it would be much better if at least a percentage of that surplus food goes to feed the poor. He says that there was a certain rabbi that whenever he saw that farmers had extra food, he would purchase their surplus and throw it into the river in order to maintain proper market values. Rashi says that the produce would float down the river and end somewhere else where people could find it. He writes that because otherwise, what right would he have to destroy the food if he could have given it to animals? There's a letter missing. Ochlim gam im yovdu. He says, but if let's say there's no other way to discard of produce or of food other than throwing it into the river or in some way otherwise discarding it, there's no issue of baltashchis in that situation. If you're doing it for a productive purpose, let's say you're discarding food in order to preserve fair market prices so that everyone in the food production chain is able to make a profit, so then that's no longer baltashchis. Val etzim divrei Rashi, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so bottom line is that baltashchis is to destroy things when there's no productive value to be gained from the destroying of that food. If there is any productive gain from the destruction of that food, such as preserving the food chain's economic viability, so then it's permissible. But of course, there's so much gray here, especially because there is so much waste that is created on all different levels of the food chain, starting from the industrial level and the manufacturing level, down to the distribution, down to the individual caterers and restaurants, down to our own households. I know that my wife will give away as much food as she can to the cleaning lady because she knows that, let's say, the cleaning lady may have people in her neighborhood that could use the food and would benefit from it. Usually the cleaning lady, sometimes they don't want to take it, but sometimes they have no problem taking it. And should always try to figure out a way that food does not go to waste. But we can't obsess over it either. We have to allow ourselves, especially in the luxurious society in which we live, to allow ourselves to indulge on some level in having freshly made food that is more presentable. But I don't know, for some reason, there's always a part of me that I sometimes will come home, I say, how come you're making a new chicken? We have so much leftovers from Shabbos, right? You ever have that attitude?
I think part of being descendants, children, otherwise of the Holocaust has that impact as well, right?
Yeah, I'll ask my wife, why are you making fresh stuff? We have so many leftovers from Shabbos, But my wife says, I thought you'd be tired of it already. I want to give you something fresh. I say, okay. No, I think we're all that way, right? Okay. All right. We'll hold it here for.
Okay, sure.